Hey everybody. I just learned some interesting news out of Connecticut. Apparently, the Connecticut Democratic Party has decided to change the name of its annual Jefferson Jackson fundraising dinner. Traditionally, this dinner was named after former Presidents Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson, who are, of course, both very prominent figures in the history of the Democratic Party as well as American history generally. This decision was apparently prompted by some pressure and activism from particularly the Connecticut branch or chapter of the NAACP. The rationale is that Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson are too closely connected to slavery and the oppression of Native Americans, which are often called America's original sins, to be, to deserve to be used as the symbols of a fundraiser for an institution like the Democratic Party. And so the Connecticut Democratic Party has chosen to grant that request. I'm not sure what they're changing the name to, but I wanted to bring this up because it raises interesting issues that pertain to the controversy over whether the Confederate battle flag should continue to be flown and displayed in a celebratory manner on public property and on the taxpayer's dime in the United States. Now, I maintain that it should not be. The reason, like I've stated in a past video, is that the Confederate flag is an inherently racist symbol. This is a symbol that represents the Confederate States of America. It didn't officially represent it as its official flag, but it's come to, from the beginning, that was a symbol that was meant to represent the Confederate cause. And that cause, root, stem, and branch, was fundamentally, inherently, and indisputably unjust. There were no redeeming qualities to it. This is a country, a short-lived country, the Confederate States of America, that was, from its very inception, based explicitly on the premise of white supremacy and slavery. The flag then came to be used on a widespread basis throughout the South in the mid-20th century, explicitly in opposition and resistance to racial integration and the goals of the civil rights movement. So this is a flag that just, regardless of how certain people in certain parts of the country subjectively perceive it, this is a flag that inherently represents racism and enslavement, a crime against humanity. I can say that without tongue-in-cheek and without exaggeration. Now, when it comes to figures like Thomas Jefferson or Andrew Jackson, I think the situation is a lot more complex. I think those historical figures arguably do have redeeming qualities, saving graces, if you will, that arguably justify continuing to use them as symbols of various aspects of the American heritage, if you will. Thomas Jefferson obviously was the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. Now, obviously, he did not live up to that noble ringing principle that he enshrined in the Declaration, namely that all men are created equal. Obviously, he owned slaves and went so far as to father several children with his slave concubine, Sally Hemings, yet never freed her or them. And, if you read his writings in Notes on the State of Virginia, for example, he expresses a lot of, attitudes that are representative of the profound racism that was just endemic in American society at that time and that still hasn't been eradicated to this day. But at the same time, that principle that all men are created equal is inherently valid and inherently inspiring. And although its principal author did not live up to that principle, the principle itself still holds true. And I think the Declaration of Independence itself is still a noble document. I think it's just a tragedy and a shame that American society has failed to live up to the message of that document so much throughout its history. But let's not forget, the Declaration brought the United States into being, and for all of the injustices that American society has perpetrated throughout the past, it's also done a lot of good. I'm not one of those folks who think that the United States is this hopefully and irredeemably racist, sexist, misogynist, nativist, imperialist society. I think that America has been a force for a great deal of good in the world, as well as for many injustices and even downright acts of evil, acts of outright evil as well. So, in the case of, say, the American flag or a historical figure such as, Thomas Jefferson or George Washington for that matter, who obviously has a state and the nation's capital named after him, In cases such as those, I think there is enough good to go along with the bad to justify keeping those symbols in place. When it comes to someone like Andrew Jackson, to be honest, I'm less familiar with his career as president. I'm less familiar with whatever saving graces his presidency might have had. I'm more familiar with the bad of his presidency, from the Trail of Tears to his support for slavery um, to his general status as America's first imperial president, so to speak. He was the first president who really began to gather an inordinate amount of power into his hands as chief executive, a degree and a kind of power that the framers of the Constitution did not envision for the presidency of the United States. And unfortunately, he's had a great many ears and ideological and policy descendants in that regard. But then again, maybe Andrew Jackson also has redeeming characteristics that would justify keeping his name as a symbol of fundraising dinners, or justify keeping memorials to him across the country, or what have you. Again, it all depends on the nature of, in this case, Andrew Jackson himself. It all depends on the nature of the historical figure. All of the history surrounding the Confederate battle flag tells me that that is a symbol that is irredeemable, that has no saving graces, no pros, only cons. This is a symbol that from top to bottom really represents slavery and white supremacy. So I don't think there's any good reason to display that kind of flag anywhere in a celebratory manner, anywhere on government property in the United States, on the taxpayer's dime, including, of course, the tax dollars of a great many African Americans whose ancestors the Confederates fought to keep in chains. But when it comes to someone like Thomas Jefferson, or Andrew Jackson, or George Washington, or the United States flag as opposed to the Confederate flag, battle flag, that's a different story. I think in those cases, there's a lot of good to go along with the bad, and the good arguably outweighs the bad. And so I think you can justify continuing to use those historical figures and symbols like the U.S. flag and to display them in a laudatory manner. They represent a lot of good as well as their fair share of injustice and even evil. That's my take on it, folks. Feel free to come back at me with your thoughts on the subject. Looking forward to hearing them. Peace out.